Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today, Nate and I are here, and we're talking about personal finance. We feel it's a subject that isn't talked about enough, especially in education, especially with our own experience, but we just thought it would be useful to bring up this topic and share it with everyone. So, I guess to start off, we could give our personal experience with high school and I guess the lack of personal finance classes and lessons that we were faced with in high school and I guess the lack of financial literacy that most people in high school had. And
No, for sure. Yeah. How about you describe basically what
sure,
your financial education in high school specifically?
sure. So there was one class that was optional that seniors could take called, I think it was called personal finance or
Yeah.
something along those lines. It was a Dave Ramsey course, and honestly, it was my favorite class in high school by a large margin. It taught me all kinds of the basics about investing, starting early, and just the utility of having a emergency savings fund and just how to be financially wise and to create a budget. And I I feel like I soaked in a lot of information in that class, and I feel like having that class be an optional class is almost a disservice to all of those kids because the instant they graduate high school, you're supposed how are they going to manage their money and pay taxes and be wise financially? They probably won't be, especially if they've never even heard a lot of the language that's used in the finance world, like what compound interest even is and all of those things. And I guess one stat that really stood out to us as we were just talking before is that if you invest $500 a month into just the S&P 500, for example, which is just a...
So you just have to match the market. So roughly a 10% annual return.
Sure.
Is roughly what the S&P has had historically.
Yeah, and it showed that in 30 years, if you start when you're, I don't know, 20, well, go.
Well, it doesn't really matter when you start. The
Sure.
point is if you have $500 per month that you contribute to a account that follows the market at 10% average annual return, you'll be a millionaire in 30 years.
Yep.
And what's even crazier is if you just extend that time frame by 10 years and you start 10 years earlier, so you do a total of 40 years of $500 per month investing into the same fund, you'll have $3 million. And that just illustrates the importance of starting early and investing often. And that's something that when I heard those statistics initially, and for me, that was actually all the way in middle school, believe it or not, when I first heard about that. It blew my mind away because I had no idea that passively, simply by allowing your money to make more money, you could passively become a millionaire over time. And that shows the importance of saving and all that kind of thing. So you had the financial, what was it called again, personal finance class?
Something along those lines.
And that was pretty much it, right? I mean...
For the most part. And then... But then...
I don't think we even had economics.
No, there wasn't an economics
we didn't even
class.
have economics. Jeez.
But this is where I'd say 80% of my knowledge has come from YouTube. Searching up some Dave Ramsey videos, stock videos, finance videos, and just talking with a few financial advisors that I know, like our friend JJ's dad. But,
yep. No, for sure.
And like looking at that, just going back to that $500 a month for 40 years, you only contribute like around $200,000 to $250,000. That's how much you're actually putting in.
Yep, in raw cash.
Cash over those 40 years. And if you divide that by 40 years, it's really only $6,000 a year. Mm-hmm. It's not that much, but it's yielding $3 to $4 million in that amount of time.
Depending on the market does, yeah.
And that you can't beat that working a 9 to 5 and never investing. It's just impossible practically.
Mm-hmm. No, for sure. And then you had that personal finance class. I actually had I don't know, I think it was called Financial Peace.
Mm-hmm.
It was essentially the same kind of Dave Ramsey kind of course, and it was in middle school, and it perked my interest, and then ever since I actually opened my first brokerage account, just essentially an investing account, when I was, I think, 14. So that was pretty cool, and immediately got me into that world. It made me super interested, and hearing about those statistics and things like that. And then throughout high school, I got more and more interested, and read several different books. One particularly was called Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell. And Thomas Sowell is probably one of the most famous economists. He's been an absolute superstar of an economist over the past 50 years. So that book influenced me a ton because it gave me a much deeper understanding of just how money works, finance works, and economics work. And that one was specifically focused on, well, economics. And recently, we both read another book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And that's probably one of the most famous financial education books today, I would say. And it absolutely changed my worldview. And I had had a decent amount of financial education ahead of time. And he put it, the way he described his financial education journey was incredible. And I'll just leave it at that and say you guys should read the book because it's an incredible book. And I want to try and do a disservice to the book by summarizing it, other than just saying it was a very influential book. But bringing it back to the education specifically, so I had some, but almost all of it was me pursuing it. There was no real structure in high school. I didn't take that class. I actually couldn't. I wanted to. There was no forced. It was not part of the general education requirements in high school. And what was the percentage of U.S. states that actually require some form of financial education? What was that?
It's like 45%.
Yeah, so only about 45% of U.S. states even require a financial education course. And that's just astounding, because you take these 18-year-olds and you send them out of high school into, let's call it the real world, and we ask them to make $100,000 decisions about whether or not they want to go to college, what they want to do, and they don't know the first thing about finances, how to write a check, how to do taxes, debt, what debt means, what it can do to you long term, what interest on a debt can do to you long term, whether or not the major that you want to go into will ever have enough economic utility to pay off the debt that you're taking on, all those things. So we in our education system, we put them in this situation where, as a society, we've decided that we're going to push them into a college route. And I'm not even saying that's a bad route. That's a separate conversation to a certain extent. But nonetheless, there is that push in our society, and we simply do not prepare people well enough for such a drastic financial decision. And just in general, the finances of being an adult, we simply don't prepare them well enough. And the fact that we can have multiple courses required about art and history, and I'm not even saying those are bad courses, but we couldn't fit in. I mean, even gym's required. Band was required. And we can't fit in a single required course about financial literacy. It just seems absurd to me. So learning about those statistics, reading those books changed me hugely, and I know it had the same effect on you.
Yeah. One big thing when reading that Rich Dad, Poor Dad, he was explaining the differences on how earned wage versus passive, like portfolio wage, is taxed. Like your wage that you're working at your job, it's taxed a good 20% of it's being taken away instantly. Whereas if you have it in an investment portfolio and it's earning money over the long term, you don't actually have to pay any taxes on that till the very end. And in some sense, like if you're doing long-term investing.
No, for sure. Yeah, long-term capital gains are just the tax on any gains that you made from an increase in the stock price of the underlying asset that you own.
Yeah.
Which is you only get taxed when you actually sell the stock. But what's interesting about that is you can actually completely avoid that. So there's this particular kind of investment account called a Roth IRA.
Yes.
and it's essentially a retirement account. It's similar to a 401k. But the big thing about a Roth is that you contribute post-tax income. So this is money that has already been taxed that you contribute to the account. And then that money grows. And once you reach, is it 55?
59.5.
59, yeah, so 60 effectively. I don't know why they made it 0.5.
Yeah.
Once you reach 60, you can withdraw that money tax-free, which is just huge. I mean, it's incredible. So it's a hack almost in the system. And as you pointed out, when you allow money to make more money for you, you get taxed way less. Versus if you spend money more, or basically generating money from an income from a job, that gets taxed at a much higher rate. Mm-hmm. So, and he pointed that out, Robert Kiyosaki in Rich Dad Poor Dad, he pointed that out very well.
Yeah. And he said something about, like, if your money isn't making money for you when you're sleeping, you probably will never become financially free in some sense.
It's very difficult.
It's very hard unless you have an incredible income coming in each week. And that just, it showed me, like, all right, I'm going to work hard at my job, but I'm also going to set aside money into this Roth specifically. Because if we go back to that chart, which I don't have on the screen, but the chart was about $3 million at the end of that 40-year investment journey. Let's say you just had that in a regular brokerage account. The government's going to steal a good 35% of that. A good, what is that? A good million they'll just pull right from that 3 million? And you're like, oh, I have 3 million in my 401k. Oh, never mind, 2. Okay, yeah, 2, because the government stole $1 million. But if you have that Roth IRA hack, you get to keep all 3. But there's a con. You can't really pull out till you're 59, so you really have to have that delayed gratification.
Exactly, and delayed gratification is difficult, and that was the caveat about the Roth IRA is that, like you just said, you can't, well, you can, but if you pull out money before you're 60, 59 and a half, it's taxed and there's actually penalties for pulling it out. So it really, truly is money that you are willing to put aside until you're 60 or whenever you start.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is really difficult to do, especially if you're in an uncertain financial, situation. So and $500, that's a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, that's a lot to invest. And it's less about the amount, it's more about the habit of doing it and actually starting the process. Because later on, if you're tracking your finances, hopefully contributing a larger amount will be more feasible. When you're 19, when you're 20, when you're 25, it's hard, man. It's really hard. But nonetheless, the statistics bear out that delayed gratification and that habit forming of investing every month or every year in a consistent pattern, you get on that exponential curve. And the sooner you get on that exponential curve, the greater the account value will be at the end of the day. And that was just astounding to me when I learned about that specifically. And most people just don't know that, frankly.
And some of you might be saying, well, I don't have $500 a month. Well, honestly, start super, super small. Let's just do a quick analysis of, like, let's say you go to Starbucks, I don't know, every week. That might even be conservative in some sense. But let's say $10 a week. That's around $40 a month. If you, instead of going to Starbucks, pulled that money and threw it into your Roth IRA, it might take a little, it's painful at first, but you'd be surprised how much that grows over a year. And it's like, oh, it really didn't take that much money because all I had to do was just transfer or just change my habit a little bit, and instantly I could just have a little bit of cash flow pouring in. And then you can realize, what other things can I kind of minimize and be a little bit more disciplined on? Well, and then you start throwing it towards the Roth, because if you're a person who wants to be financially free when you're older and maybe support your kids when you're older, that's probably the best way to do it. And it's very possible for anyone, for the most part. And starting small, you don't need that 500. But
no, for sure. So we talked about our personal education, and then in terms of financial literacy, and then also the statistic that essentially half of America has no requirement in high school for any level of financial education, which is just astounding. And then let's talk about, well, what are the current statistics regarding American households today?
Sure.
And I know we did a little research before this, and some of them we knew, but the average credit card debt per American household was it
6,200.
yeah, $6,000 per household in credit card debt. And the thing about credit card debt too is the interest rates are exorbitantly high, so it's very difficult to get out of, it's a trap, frankly. Um, and what was a couple of the other ones? I know you had a couple.
It's almost makes perfect sense to me if what was the statistic? If only half the states or less really require that personal finance course, it says only around 55% of Americans actually own stock. That actually lines up pretty well.
Yeah,
It
that
makes
does.
sense with that education system saying, oh, only 45% of the states. It's like, no wonder not that many Americans, or a little bit over half, own stock. And I guess that's why we're trying to make this video, get the word out, get people thinking about this a little bit more. And let's see, there's a few other stats that were kind of mind-blowing, which was around 40% of Americans have less than $300 in savings. And don't get me wrong, life can be tough, and
For
sometimes
sure.
life is expensive, and I don't want to paint those kind of people into saying that they have bad habits, but I feel like if they would have received a little bit more financial education, they might have been a little bit more wiser with their habits. Because once you sign that student loan, and once you start paying money on that credit card, there's almost no going back. In some sense, you've kind of set yourself up for a route of trying to repay, and interest, like we were explaining before in the investment dimension, it helps your investment grow. It grows. And the exact same thing occurs when you have a debt. That interest makes that nest egg of the debt grow as well. So you have to, it's not like you just have to pay off a lump sum. It's a sum that continues to grow with time.
And the longer you wait, the bigger it grows.
And so that's, I think having more people realize what that even means when they're taking on that debt, I feel like more people would be a little bit more hesitant, or maybe would save up or create better habits, and or maybe delay college a little bit, or I don't know.
No, for sure. And I mean, if you just look at the introduction of, I think PayPal specifically now has a buy now pay later button that they've actually incorporated, or something like that. I think Amazon has a similar thing.
Sure, yeah.
And I mean, you
plans.
can payment plans. What's so fascinating about this is, like, you can get payment plans for almost anything now. Like, almost anything. I've seen them for fridges, for like toasters. I mean, it's crazy what you can get them for. And it when you do the economic analysis, when you actually look at, okay, let's say I bought this for cash right now, or I got a payment plan, and you can do this with, the classic example is a car. And let's say you have a $20,000 car that you get a payment plan for. Well, depending on the interest rate, you can actually end up, let's say you get a loan for that car, you can actually end up paying more like $26,000 to $28,000, and that's if you pay it off in the required period, for a $20,000 car. Versus if you had paid for it in cash, you would have been able to avoid that $6,000 to $8,000. And of course, the more that you extend the time frame of debt, the more things that you're in debt for, the greater the burden it is financially. And don't get me wrong, sometimes you got to take on debt. Sometimes you got to get that house. Sometimes you need a new vehicle. Your old one died on you. But the point is avoiding it when you can, and creating good habits to actually save money to be able to pay things in full is huge. In our society today, simply just doesn't do that at all. What percentage of cars are leased again?
27% of new vehicles are leased.
Yeah, and there's a reason that dealerships make the most money off of leased vehicles. It's a fact, they do, and it's a factor of this interest rate. It's a factor of the fact that you're putting almost nothing down. And you don't even get to keep the vehicle when the time is up.
That's the big factor. They get to keep all the money that you paid them, and they get to keep the car at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Keeping the asset. And so having people learn about what a lease actually means and how, it might sound so appealing. I only have to pay $200, $250 a month. That's nothing. I can do that pretty easily. There's no way I could put down multiple $1,000s for this car. But then it's like, open up a Google Sheets or an Excel and just multiply that by 24 or 48 or however many months that is, and add in a little bit of an interest rate. You're going to be paying so much more. And
overall, for sure.
And especially if it's a lease, all of that money is being put into something that at the end of the day, you don't own and the dealership owns. And so it's sad to see people do that and maybe not even realize the implications until after they've done it. And so that's why we're just trying to get this word out, but it's kind of saddening to see these statistics, but there's optimism too. There can be reformation.
No, for sure. And specifically one statistic that I heard a couple of years back by the Brookings Institute.
Oh, yeah.
Which is, and it's a fascinating statistic because in one sense you can take it as a extremely negative, derogatory frame of thinking. In another sense, it's the most optimistic thing I've ever heard, frankly. And it's that if you live in the United States and you make 3 basic decisions, I take that back, not basic decisions, but you make 3 things a priority in your life to accomplish. You graduate high school, you don't have kids out of wedlock, and you get a job and you stick with the job.
A full-time job.
Full-time job. 90, I think it's 98%. 98% of people that do those 3 things will not remain in permanent poverty in the U.S. And that is astounding to think about. And obviously, it's not that simple. It's a statistic. It's meant to represent a broader truth. And the broader truth is simply that in a lot of circumstances, you have an ability to change your future and to change your future self for the better by making a couple things in your life a priority. And that in and of itself is incredibly optimistic because it means that all the power is at your fingertips. All you have to do is actualize that reality, that statistic. You just have to push towards that goal and actually enact in action those things. And that doesn't mean there aren't going to be roadblocks. That doesn't mean life isn't going to throw you a boulder on your face every once in a while, because it certainly is. But in a lot of sense, it's an incredibly optimistic perspective. Because if the problem that we've referenced this before, but there's one of 2 scenarios. Either the problem is with the world, reality. This is straight T.S. Eliot. He wrote a play called The Cocktail Party. Excellent play. And this is essentially the point he was making, in that either the problem is with the world, with reality, in which case you're screwed, it's over. How are you going to move reality or shift reality? Good luck. Or the problem is something that is within your control and that is partially, at least, your fault. And as annoying as that is, that you are responsible in some sense for your current situation, if it's a negative situation, the beauty of that and the optimistic side of that is that you then have the ability to rectify it and to actually get out of that situation. And that statistic, I've always, you can kind of have a gut reaction to it and say, well, it's not that simple. And don't get me wrong, there's a lot of truth to that. But in a large sense, there's a lot of optimism in that. And it shows you the power that you have to make good decisions in your life that will result in a better outcome for your future self and hopefully the people around you too. So I guess that's probably the main point of this podcast, is that through minimal amounts of education, self-discipline, and taking on responsibility, you're able to make small decisions that build into big decisions, that build into big life consequences that are immensely beneficial for you and the people around you. And I think that's probably the main point here.
Mm-hmm.
I would assume you would agree.
Yeah, it is. We are blessed to live in America with the opportunity to have a job. Like, the amount of companies that if you go around the block, so many signs say, we're hiring. come work.
Yeah.
It's like you have the ability to put in those extra hours, set aside a little bit more money, create a little bit of a savings or a little bit of an emergency fund, and then start funding that Roth. And you really have that potential. And honestly, a great place to start is Dave Ramsey. As much as some people might hate him, I really think for the majority of people in America, he's going to be so useful. He's going to make you realize that your actions really do matter, and you can take small baby steps, like he always says.
Yep.
You can take those baby steps and you can build wealth over time. And in my opinion, that's great for most people. And then if you're really interested after that, check out that Rich Dad Poor Dad, because he kind of explains that, yes, for the majority of people, that Dave Ramsey slow investment approach is the best. But for some who want to take more risks, there can be real estate and other smaller stocks that are a little bit more risky, but can sometimes yield larger returns. And you might lose money, but you might make more money. And just in my opinion, I like to kind of diversify my portfolio among both those strategies. One, a long-term safe approach, and two, a shorter-term, maybe high-growth approach. But I've been blessed to have the opportunity to do that. But I would check out both of those people, Robert Kiyosaki and Dave Ramsey. And start with Dave Ramsey, though, just because he's kind of hits the bare bone basics. And
no, he outlines the basics very well. And frankly, the basics in a lot of topics is exactly what you need. Hence why I read Basic Economics.
That one too.
Because
check that. I'll throw all these in the description.
Everything, as I've said many times, the second you want to learn anything about, well, anything, the first thing you realize in that quest for knowledge is that you actually don't know anything. So books that can introduce you to a topic in a practical, concise, and coherent way are a huge asset to you. And starting small, starting with the basics I do that with nearly every subject. So it's extremely beneficial. And Dave Ramsey does that really well, and he's made a big impact in a lot of people's lives. And one of his big points to his, let's call it, financial philosophy is that he doesn't want you just to be wealthy for the sake of being wealthy. He wants you to be wealthy so that you can be a positive force for good in the world. And he always says, make a lot of money and give a lot of money in a more eloquent way. But nonetheless, that's what he pushes for, and it's a beautiful message. It really is.
Yeah, because if you're struggling your entire life about trying to make ends meet, and there's almost the probability that you're going to be able to give and help people financially in your community and around you, that's a low probability. The people that are the wealthiest have the potential to give the most, and I think that's what the message Dave preaches. Be wise with your spending so that you can set yourself up for a better life, but also, like we've been saying, impact the ones around you and the community around you. And it's a noble goal, in my opinion. And you might hear some people hear this and say, these people are so focused on money, they're so greedy. It's like, I think you're missing the point here, because it's not about the money, it's about the freedom that money brings, and it's about the good you can do with said money. And I think greed is the wrong word for that.
No, for sure. The motivation matters, and if the motivation is towards the good, then that's the key here. That is definitely the key. So yeah, and everyone, and again, I'll reiterate, everyone is going to be born into different circumstances. Everyone is going to have different levels of financial education, different, family structures, born in different places, and all that's very true. So it's, I'm not trying, and I know you're not trying to make it sound as if it's some easy, simple, just do these 3 things and you'll be good to go. That's not the point here. The point here is to focus on statistics, the truth, and also focus on you as an individual and your ability to take proactive steps in your life to better your future self. And I think I would say that's the core point here. And learning about that, and then taking on that responsibility for my future self and for the people around me, has been immensely beneficial, and specifically in the area of finances, and that's what we're talking about. And frankly, I'm excited to learn a lot more.
Yeah,
So,
there's always more to learn.
always more.
And there's this phrase, you have to be a fool before you're able to be a master.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like, you really got to just, even though you might not know much about this, check out those links and resources that we were explaining. And you might not know what they're talking about, but you have YouTube and you have Google and you have older people around you, hypothetically. Ask them about it. Start bringing up this in your discussion at the dinner table. Ask your parents about personal finance. Talk to your kids about personal finance. It's useful, and I think people will be more well off if this discussion was had more. So, I guess.
For sure. No, I think it was a good place to.
Yeah, it's a good place to end.
Good place to end it. So.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for sticking around to the end of this episode. If you found this discussion meaningful or engaging, feel free to give me a rating on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, comment on YouTube. Share this with your friends. If you found it meaningful, I'm sure they would too. Thank you so much, guys. Have a great rest of your day.